once again, we went to the FMX in Germany and talked to experts of the animation industry. Up first, Kyle Balda, director of the Minions movie, shares how he ended up in this job, his perspective on directing and animation, and of course, some inspiring advice.
Hey everybody, this is JK from Animator Island, and I am here with Kyle Balda. Appreciate you talking to us today.
Thanks for having me.
Do you want to go ahead and tell folks about what it is you do in your latest project?
I've been working in animation for a little over 20 years. I've worked at Industrial Light and Magic in the early days of my career. Movies like The Flintstones, Mars Attacks, The Mask, Jumanji. And then I was at Pixar for about 4 or 5 years, worked on Toy Story 2, A Bug's Life, and Monsters, Inc. And then I came to Europe, and I've been traveling around Europe for a few years, like teaching at various film schools. And then I settled in Paris. I've been there for about 12 years now, and working mostly with Pierre Caffan at McGuff on commercials and TV series and short form animation. And about 6 years ago, Chris Melandri set up with McGuff, Illumination McGuff, working on Despicable Me. I was the head of layout, and then I started directing, and I was a co-director on The Lorax, and just recently directed Minions with Pierre Caffan.
Exciting stuff. So I was really curious because when I was younger, my dream was always be a director. And then I realized somewhere along the way you can't just jump to director. And then it was less of a dream because I didn't want to put in all the work. But coming from the animation background, how was that transition from being an animator to being a director? And is there anything that surprised you about it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, being a director seemed like such off in the distance, and how could you ever do that? And when I originally got into animation, it was just because I loved animation and I wanted to animate characters. And in doing that, in supervising animation, I started to really like to be sort of a mentor, and so I appreciated that part of the experience about working with other people. So when I started to teach at film schools, I made this sort of a master class of like, what are the things that I think are important to know about approaching animation. And I spent a pretty fair amount of time talking about staging. Staging is one of the principles of animation, but it's in itself has so many principles, and that kind of led to my wanting to work in layout, and try that, because I felt like, well, what would it be like to try to tell a story with the camera and the staging of the characters? I've practiced a lot of animation and performance, so what would happen in layout, and then that sort of got me a little bit closer to directing, because you're thinking about the camera and it's the storytelling. You're kind of moving out of like working on a shot and working more on sequences. And then I was offered the opportunity to go to Los Angeles to direct some of the short form marketing materials for Despicable Me, some of the toolkits and the short films and this sort of thing. And that was like a sort of like warming up and sort getting my feet wet with directing. And then Chris Melandri asked me to work on The Lorax, and so that was like the big break, And it's hard to know to say what to prepare. I mean, I think animating or directing shorter things is very good, but some aspects of directing you can't prepare for. You just have to do it, like recording voice actors, I think. It's the first time I did that. It was a very nervous experience because I'd never done it before. But the actor that's in front of you has done it many times, Right. And but at the end of the day, they're just looking, for the most part, to know what's right for their character and how this particular scene that they're working on fits into the movie, and so you can warm up to it pretty quickly. But some things like that you just have to do it the first time, and then you eventually start to get more comfortable.
Very cool. So with the Lorax being your first time, what did you take with you to Minions, or is there what were the things that you wish you not even wish you had known, but the things that you learned on the Lorax?
The thing that I learned the most was because I had the chance to work with Chris Renaud, who is the director of the Lorax, and so I was working alongside of him, and he had already had experience with Despicable Me, and he's a very clear and decisive director, and I had a lot of opportunities to learn from him, on how he's thinking about the story and how he's thinking about this, the telling of the story, the interpreting the script into storyboards and all this kind of stuff. And then on the Minions, I worked a lot with the story team, so that was my first time kind of directing the story artists myself, and it was very valuable to having watched Chris do it and bringing that over to that experience. And then you start to find slowly like your own ways of working in this sort of thing, but having a good mentor, I think, is always the most important thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, mentors. I mean, it seems like animation is built around mentorship, apprentice and mentor. And a lot of times I think, we maybe lose a little bit with the studios that, we bring people on for one movie and then they're gone and that sort of thing. But so it sounds like director wasn't that big of a jump from teaching. Would you say that there are aspects of both that?
The thing that's similar is working with other people. One thing with teaching, because when you're working with students doing their own film project, you're advising and you're looking at it and you're sort of exposing to them maybe what's not working or the weak spots of the film. And I think having some of the vocabulary and the skills to do that, but ultimately you're trying to help the student get to where they're going. In directing, when you're working with artists, you're trying to get them to help serve the film so that the film is the best film that it can be. So it's a similar process, but rather than always going in the direction of like what they're trying to express, sometimes it's going to work for the film and sometimes it's not. So you have to be able to kind of guide the artists that you're working with towards that goal.
Gotcha. Have you ever had one of those opportunities or situations where you had to put your foot down with an animator and say, all right, you got to go this way?
Yeah, it happens quite often. It's not so much putting the foot down or like that's a bad idea or something like that. It's more often what happens is you have a different perspective on the film than the animator does, because the animator is so in focus and they're so on the ground with that one moment of the storytelling, and they might have a really great idea, or they want to make the shot a little bit longer and add a couple of story beats to it, and they might be really great ideas, but in the flow of the film at that point, it's going to break the rhythm of what needs to happen. And so it's sometimes, if it doesn't break the flow, if it fits appropriately for the film, it can be an idea that that the director didn't think about. That's totally valid to put in there, because the flip side of that story is that the animator has the perspective of the character and they're living with the character all day long. Yeah. And they kind of become the advocates for the character in that sense, where the director's the advocate for the story, and sort of it's like the meeting of those two things. Ultimately, you're trying to get the best character development and the best storytelling, and that's where that marriage can happen.
Is there an aspect of filmmaking that when you got into your career you found more compelling or done in a certain way that we've gotten away from, that you think would be good to reintroduce? Because I know that when you were starting, probably there was a lot less of the CG stuff, and now it's almost exclusively CG stuff. Is there something from that almost old world that you would put into the new pipeline that you think would help?
I think it's interesting to try to use multiple mediums in filmmaking. I love stop motion. I think it's the absolute hardest type of animation to do by far, and I have a lot of respect for it. And it has such a rich, quality and feel to it. And we try a little bit with Minions to integrate some stop motion look into a kind of a dream sequence that happens, this storytelling sequence, to kind of show you that you're not no longer in that world of the film. You're in something else. You're inside the mind of one of the characters, and this is how it's sort of perceived. But and so that was an opportunity for us to try, even though it's still all 3D to try a sort of multimedia look. But I think that that's a really nice usage of it. I mean, it's maybe similar to how in some live action movies, if they have a flashback that's like it goes to black and white or something like this, you know, and using 2D in a 3D movie can be helpful to sort of take you into a different perspective of the storytelling.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great idea. And I think Kung Fu Panda did that a little bit, where they would just jump into 2D, and it helped you to feel like you were in a different world, but it's still part of that sort of world. So if you fast forward 20 years from now, you've been in there 20 years, getting close to 40, what would be, is there like a dream goal or a project that you would absolutely love to have done, or is there something you would look back in 20 more years and say, boy, I wish I would have done that somewhere along the way?
Maybe at some point trying live action would be interesting. I had the chance to direct one very, very short live action piece, and it felt so much different. It sort of feels to me like what I imagine like a live musician would experience being on stage with a band. Everything's happening at once. The lights are all there, everything's going on, the crowd's there so that if you make any mistakes, it's going to be, you know, this is the pressure of that. And animation is like being a studio player, you know, where you can refine it and you can polish it and you can re-record it and you're not under the constraint of it being a live performance. Just because live action, when you're on the set, you know, everything's happening there, the actors are there, the lights, the camera, you know, it's all going on at the same time. So there's something really exhilarating about that. But the thing that I like the most about any kind of filmmaking is just the puzzle of the film and the story, you know, and how you're going to tell the story, and so I don't have like at least for the moment, I don't have like a really specific story that I'm just dying to tell. It's more about like when you read a script and thinking like, okay, what's the best way to tell the story? Like how would you interpret this and how would you adapt it? That's the kind of challenge that really excites me.
Cool. When you are at that stage, do you find yourself still doing things like thumbnails and things like that, or is it more in the directorial role? Do you leave that for somebody else to do? With the animation shot itself? Yeah, that's definitely the animator. Will do that. There's occasionally we might do a couple of drawings or something like that if there's something really specific. There's occasionally sometimes something really specific. When I'm working with storyboard artists, you know, we might sketch out a couple of like really rough panels just to try to like plan the shots. I like to do a lot of previs in 3D and try to, you know, just stage the characters and stuff like this. So that's one way that I can work with the storyboard artist, is do like a quick 3D interpretation if there's a camera move or something like that, and I can give that to the story artist to at least have an idea of like how the shot's going to be designed. Very often we'll do all that kind of stuff in layout, but sometimes if you're trying to, you know, do something conceptual with the camera that's story orientated, it's good to get that up front. So there's lots of different ways that you can kind of do roughs, you know, to plan things. Definitely. Cool. Do you miss animation? Like, do you miss doing it now, or do you still get a chance to every once in a while just...
I don't really get the chance to animate so much anymore. I do a little bit more storyboarding now than that. And sometimes I'll do like a kind of a animatic type of storyboard. So I do get a little bit of animation. The thing that I love about animation is just how time stops when you're doing it, you know, and you're just in relationship with the character and everything else kind of goes away. So it's very kind of meditative in a sense. But the thing that's exciting about directing is how, in the same amount of time, how much you can affect the overall story. So there's definitely, it definitely appeals more to me now as a director.
All right, I'm going to read this one because otherwise I'll mess it up. Okay. Brad Bird is quoted as saying, "Animation is about creating the illusion of life, and you can't create it if you don't have one." I think sometimes young animators become so engulfed in their work that they can kind of forget that there's life outside of animation.
Yeah, that's a great quote.
So what do you do outside of the directorial role to kind of keep things fresh and bring new perspectives to your actual work? I do a lot of reading. I love reading about, it has nothing to do with animation, but I love reading about astrophysics.
And then just the ideas about, the size of the universe and all this kind of stuff, it just always blows my mind. So I think, that I like to run, I like to do yoga, I like to be out, I like to travel, love to meet people, hear their stories and talk to them. And then I find that somehow, things always relate to each other, so you're always like pulling stuff from your experiences in life and putting them into your work. There might be something, a little idea about something you see a kid do, and like a little gesture, and that ends up being something that one of the minions does. And it's, if you're always like at your desk and never outside, then you're not going to have those kinds of experiences that you can draw from. But yeah, I think that's a great quote, and I totally agree with it.
Yeah, definitely. And then we'll end with, I'm sure a lot of people will come up to you and ask, what's one piece of advice that you can give to me for my career or whatever it is. So what's the thing that you consistently tell people when they approach you about, what they can do and where they should go and that sort of thing? Is there something that you're always repeating to people? And
the main thing that I always repeat, just because it's something I think in the beginning, I hesitated a lot, like before I would, if I was going to make my student film, I just waited for days and weeks for like my idea to come. And I think when you're in the beginning, you have a feeling like ideas just come to you, and they come in their full, complete form, and then you just have to, like, as if you're like just translating from God or something like that, you just put it down. Yep. Or like if you draw a picture, how frustrated you can become with yourself because it doesn't look how it looks in your head. But you have to do it. You have to just get started, and you have to make mistakes, and you have to, if you're trying to come up with an idea for a film project, just start writing. Just start, and that critic that's inside of you that's going to tell you that this is stupid, nobody's going to like this. You just have to try not to listen so much for a while, and just show up and do it, and try and reshape it and refine it, and keep moving with it, and just trust the process. And then also know that it's not going to be the only thing that you ever made. So if it's not perfect and you made mistakes, then take what you learned from that and do the next one. But don't wait, for it to happen and be perfect. It's never going to work that way.
Stars aligning, that sort of thing. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Kyle. I appreciate it.